when you announced that you were not going to be running for re-election, your statement said in part that too many legislators on Capitol Hill don't understand the consequences that policies that they enact could have on that young adult living in a trailer park, struggling to make ends meet.
Yep.
You were that young adult at that
Yeah.
one point. I don't know how many people here know that about you, that you come from humble circumstances. But how important was that to your decision to vote against?
Yeah, it's because really understand. Well, first off, I was a partner at Price Waterhouse. I've been trained in implementation. My entire career was working with big companies, taking complex things and operationalizing them. So when we looked at this Medicaid, the Senate mark, the House mark was fine. It was just clear to me it was not thought out. And I really did think about it, like the tax policy, the same thing. In fact, my mother's in Nashville. I'll be headed back this weekend. I'm going to stop by that trailer park. It's still on Richards Road in Antioch. And I lived on Waikiki Boulevard when I lived with my family there. It had previously been called Hawaiian Village. It was Countryside Village. And then I had a trailer when I moved out of home. I left the trailer park for about a year, and then I moved into one on Sugarcane Lane. But I thought about going back into there and asking them how they thought about the consequences of this policy. I'll give you a good example to give you an idea of how that does shape my understanding or my view of policy. The no tax on tips. So when I was living in that trailer on Waikiki Boulevard with my family, and I was still going to high school, I became a waiter at a restaurant that was kind of like a Denny's, a highway restaurant. And I made good money because as a male waiting tables back in the 76.
And this is before there were taxes on tips, right?
Yeah, right.
They were enacted in '82 by
right.
Bob Dole.
So, I was, and it was all cash tips anyway. I'm a 16-year-old kid. You really think I'm going to declare this for my taxes anyway? I mean,
right.
My gosh, let's be real. So, but 3 years later, I'm not on Waikiki Boulevard. I'm now on Sugarcane Lane in that same trailer park, and I'm a warehouse worker. This is just after I graduated high school. I was supposed to go off to the Air Force, had a car accident, found myself without any college prospects for a while after thinking I was going to go to OCS training in the Air Force. But now I'm a warehouse worker. Now, over the span of 3 years, living in that same trailer park, Thom Tillis, the waiter, gets a tax brace, but Thom Tillis, the warehouse worker, doesn't. So it's just inherently unfair. If you really are trying to have an impact on them, then why don't you have a policy that's instructed by all of the circumstances in that trailer park? And similarly, I'm sure that there are a lot of people that are Medicaid eligible in that trailer park today. The one footnote is, Jelly Roll, the country music singer, he grew up in that trailer park too, about 20 years removed. I found that out when I asked him questions in a hearing up here. But yeah, I do look at where I came from, and I try to always think in terms of how does it affect people that are on that bubble too.
And when you had your conversations with President Trump on text and on the phone, you were telling him that you thought his advisors were not giving him the full truth about what the Senate bill would do.
Absolutely. And I've told the president a number of times that I very seldom believe I've ever disagreed with him. But I have disagreed with bad advice that some of his advisors are giving him, whether it's on a nominee or whether it's on policy. I told the president that the House mark was great. The House mark dealt with work requirements, saved $800 billion. There's only a $200 billion delta between the Senate mark, which was largely requested by staff in the White House. It wasn't the brainchild of any one member that I can find here, but it does so much damage. It just wasn't thought through. And hopefully we can convince them that we have to fix it. And that we can either fix it with a bipartisan bill coming up or the ACA extensions or some way we need to fix it. Otherwise, I told the president, I really do believe it could be his Obamacare.
Because of the promise that he made that was not true, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor.
And now it's like, if you like Medicaid and you're eligible, you can keep it. That's fundamentally untrue because the funding mechanisms are probably going to take people who are eligible for it off of it over time, or it's going to create an enormous unfunded mandate on the states in a time frame that they can't absorb. In North Carolina, the estimate is nearly $26 billion over 10 years. Now, people say, well, we've delayed it for a year. I said, the numbers are still the same. It's a 10-year hit. But and then pretending like it won't have political consequences.
Do you think the people in that trailer park, do you think that they understand what's in that bill and how it could impact them?
They don't, but they will. They'll be targeted, and they should be. I mean, if I were
targeted politically, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, they will find a way in today's world. You can find those folks, and if you're a competent Democrat, you're going to figure out a way to communicate to them how that affects their lives, and it almost certainly will. If it's that trailer park or the one that I spent a little bit of time in Jacksonville, Florida, or challenge communities across the country, that was the point. The House bill I had no problem with. And I actually had sympathy with some of our dead hawks, of which I am one, to say I think we should cut more. I think we should find $200 billion more in savings for $1 trillion, just not in this way, because it's not sustainable and it's politically, I think it's politically just devastating.
When you told that to the president, what did he say?
I think he probably heard it, maybe resonated with it. I was told by more than one person that he preferred the House bill more, but there's no question the Democrats are going to say that he broke his promise and that Medicaid recipients are going to be at risk. But he's got people that are giving him bad advice that are around him every day, and I continue to say, look, you got people here. I have a vested interest in making sure that President Trump's the most successful Republican president in the history of this country. I was a Republican long before President Trump was, and I'll be a Republican for the rest of my life. I built a majority in North Carolina. I want to see that that successful streak and all the benefits that have occurred in North Carolina occur and continue. And so you have to be able to tell truth to power. That's our job. And that's exactly what I attempted to do last week, and that's what I'll continue to do. And I'll continue to work with the president if he chooses to. I'm a transaction guy. Completely believe they missed the mark on this one. His advisors got it wrong. Off to the next transaction. Let's fix this or work on something else. There are plenty of things where we agree.
The Wall Street Journal reported that when he made his final pitch to you, you said, I can't effing do that.
No, it sounds like me, but I don't remember the conversation at that level of granularity. But I made it very clear to the president and I have never had a pitched discussion. Every time, and I've probably done it more than many, every time I'm very frank with him, but he has never been untoward, never raised his voice.
He just goes on social media and does it.
Yeah, well, that's the first time he ever did. And so after he did that, after I told the president that he's clearly got the votes, that I will try and work to get something done in the House. He didn't need my vote, and that I would be respectful and quiet and try to do my work on the House side. And then I got that text that I texted him, or I saw I'd never read it, but I saw like the first sentence. I told the president in another text, I said, now it's time to start looking for my replacement because I don't deal with that kind of bullshit.
Mm-hmm. And what did he say to that?
He texted back, I am, and I think subsequent to that, he started taking interviews. He needs to, because it's going to be a tough race in North Carolina. We got to get a good candidate, and I'm committed to helping the president get that candidate elected. If it's not, well, let's say a handful of people that will never make it in a general election in North Carolina.
Yeah, well, you've talked about the former lieutenant governor, Mark Robinson, who has a lot of baggage, a lot of weird stuff.
He's still got Mini Soldier out there. For
Mini Soldier, his porn
Come on,
avatar name or whatever, allegedly. President Trump endorsed him last time, loved him. He's very pro-Trump. What happens if Trump gets behind him?
I think it'd be devastating. And if you noticed, before the revelations of Mini Soldier and everything came out, Mark Robinson was not on the stage any longer. So I think the president probably got the right intel that it was not a good idea to call him Martin Luther King ×2. He is a disgrace to Martin Luther King's legacy. And there's no way if he became the nominee in North Carolina, I could possibly support him. Of course, I wouldn't support the Democrat nominee. I would just have to take a pass.
What if it were Laura Trump? There's talk of her running.
They've all got to decide. You know, our state is very difficult for Republicans to win. In both cases, I've won by fewer than 2 points. So they need to be really smart about the name on the ballot and the profile on the ballot to have an opportunity to win. It would have been a very difficult race for me. You know, Jake, you've been following elections a lot longer than I have. On election day, I've never been closer than 2 points behind my opponent, and we pulled it out in both cases. But this is going to be a tough race for someone. They need a good, solid business, right-of-center conservative to match up against whoever it is, and now it looks like it may be Governor Cooper.
Governor Cooper, who's pretty popular, two-term governor, managed to have a decent profile in North Carolina and leave the state pretty popular.
Yeah.
You were talking about the difficulties of being a Republican in this era. A columnist in the Carolina Journal wrote about you. Tillis has been one of the few elected officials on Capitol Hill in recent years who has demonstrated a willingness to stand up for the legislative branch. The story surrounding his departure from Congress is unlikely to encourage others to step into that role.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, a good example last week, and let's, before we start, I have to say the Democrats have a far worse rap sheet than Republicans when it comes to defending this institution. I only have to point to nuking the filibuster and thank God that we had Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema there to save the chamber.
No longer here.
No, and these folks now are using as a litmus test for primaries, would you nuke the filibuster? But now Republicans are starting to take that bait. I am here to defend the Article 1 branch and to collaborate with the Article 2 branch, more so when there's a Republican in there, maybe a little less so when there's a Democrat, but still I've managed to do bipartisan work when Biden was in office. But at the end of the day, I'm an institutionalist, and it's remarkable to me how I hear all these self-avowed institutionalists rationalize why they wouldn't vote for the amendment last week for John Kennedy to simply say, if we're going to give the president $1 billion a year to spend on defense production, shouldn't there actually be a consultation with Congress before it's spent? And we had dozens of our members vote against it because the president rightfully wanted it. So I don't mind the tug and pull. I think the president would be wrong if he wasn't trying to make his branch as powerful as possible. By the same token, it's our job to maintain the historic intent of the Article 1 branch.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to be dogmatic about that because I really believe that it's what has made this country so special.
Do you think that the lesson for the Republican Party right now is fall in line behind President Trump or get out of Congress?
No. Look, I made a personal decision that it wasn't an in the moment decision.
You had made the decision before all this happened with the bill.
I started a process of what I described to many of my donors and supporters of confirmatory due diligence back in January and February when I said I've got to convince myself that this transaction of being involved in the most expensive race in U.S. history again, that it's worth doing and that there is a path to winning. And I felt like I needed to determine whether or not I could raise the money that was necessary for my campaign. I needed to determine if we were going to have a going concern in terms of governing over a reasonable period of time so that I could then determine if the environment of the election, if those two things were in place, knowing that it was likely going to be a negative environment because of the historic trend of the party in power in the White House having headwinds, then I was going to make a decision probably more in the September timeframe. But it just seemed like in the moment, I don't feel like what we passed out last week had any semblance of good governance. It was an artificial deadline created by some staffer in the White House who probably wanted the signature to happen while the rockets' red glare were bursting in air, that vision on July 4th. There was nothing in that deadline that had anything to do with a Senate priority. I have said, look, we could have probably taken 10 days and fixed this bill and had the president have a highly successful bill. But you got staff over there that are so obsessed with making the date that they don't care about the outcome. They just care about checking the box. And that's what I've continued to tell the president he needs to be wary of.
I'm sure that your supporters and your donors and your constituents, some of them said, this is exactly why you need to run for re-election, because you are willing to stand up for the legislative branch. And even though you are very conservative, you are willing to work in a bipartisan way to get stuff done.
Yeah.
What do you say to that?
I felt like in the moment that I wanted to take off the table any question whatsoever about whether or not my reelection prospects had anything to do with how I make decisions here. I've been trying to tell people that for the last 10 years. Look, I got a wonderful life and a wonderful family and lots of professional options before I started this job, and I'm going to have them after I started this job. But I want to make it very clear, if you want to try and flex on me and make it look like my reelection prospects are at risk, I want to make it clear that that's not anything I care about. I care about good policy, and I care about the future of this country. And I thought taking that off the table for the next year and a half may put me in a better position to help govern and help encourage other members to stand up for our branch and for good policy and absolutely support President Trump.
But that flexing,
but on our terms.
That flexing was not coming from Roy Cooper and Josh Stein. That flexing was coming from Trump and the MAGA forces who were...
More the MAGA forces. Again, I don't have a problem with President Trump. Right. I got a problem with some of the people I consider to be amateurs advising him.
What do you make when you go on
and so I want to make it very clear to them, guys, when you act like the president, when he's out of the room, you don't impress me. And they'll hear more of that in the coming months.
Who are you talking about specifically? Stephen Miller?
We'll get to that.
What is it like? I don't know how much you go on social media. Oh, look, you got your grandkids on your socks.
Yeah, that's all three of them right there.
We'll get a close-up of that later. What do you make of, I don't know how often you go on social media and for your own mental sanity,
Never.
I hope it's never, but when people call you a RINO, a Republican in name only, even though you are obviously very conservative, though willing to work with Democrats and also willing to stand up for the legislative branch, what do you make of that criticism?
I tell them, I agree, I'm a RINO, I've just got a different take on it. I'm a Republican in need of outcomes. And the thing that most of these so-called true conservatives have in common, whether they're elected or party leaders, they've never legislated. They haven't scratched the surface of what I've been responsible for real meaningful Second Amendment bills, for property rights reform, for pro-life movement. So they can spare me the amateurish view of how this world works because they don't have a body of work to point to. I do. And so if they want to call me a RINO, then go ask themselves, what advances did we make on so many conservative issues when I was Speaker? And what have we done here on spending or on conservative legislation that's hit the president's desk that some people is bipartisan, but it's fundamentally sound conservative legislation? I don't apologize for my body of work. I've run on it in multiple primaries, and I've won every one of them.
You mentioned earlier that you thought President Trump was getting bad advice, not just about this bill, but also maybe about some of his nominees. You ultimately voted for both RFK Jr. for HHS Secretary and Pete Hegseth for Defense Secretary, even though your vote was not guaranteed until the end there. Do you regret those votes now that you've seen them in office?
Well, first, I need to set the record straight on Hegseth. I had already informed my conference that I was going to defer to the Senate Armed Services vote. If he got a unanimous vote out of Senate Armed Services, then I was going to defer to them. I was on that committee for several Congresses, but then there was that allegation that came out on that Sunday. It was net new information. I complete my due diligence. And so I interviewed a number of people. I was called over to the White House on the Thursday night asking me to vote for them. I said, I may. The vote's not till tomorrow. I've still got to complete my due diligence. And quite honestly, there were conversations that I had on Friday that made me put this allegation in the same category as the other ones that I'd worked on before he was confirmed. Now,
this had to do with abusive tactics towards women? Or towards,
that's right. Yeah. But what it came down to is, honestly, there was never an example of an eyewitness corroborated account. And I had to be fair to Pete Hegseth on that issue. Now, with the passing of time, I think it's clear he's out of his depth as a manager of a large, complex organization.
Yeah, what was your reaction to the Signalgate situation?
Well, that's just one. I mean, this whole idea of having a pause in Ukraine defensive arms, that's just amateurish. I mean, that's from somebody who doesn't understand large organization dynamics. So, I don't regret the decision I made back then based on the facts as I knew them then. But today I am beginning to wonder if maybe Armed Services was a little bit generous with respect to their assessment of his capabilities as a manager of the world's largest, most complex, and arguably consequential organization.
So you don't regret it, but if you had to do it again today, you probably wouldn't vote yes?
I think based on the information I have today, if all I had was the information on the day of the vote, I'd certainly vote for him again. But now I have the information of him being a manager, and I don't think that his probationary period's been very positive.
What about RFK Jr.? Because he's obviously gone back on a lot of the promises he made to your colleague, Senator and Dr. Cassidy, about vaccines.
I think that will be something that we'll take up. I defer a lot to Bill Cassidy on that. He's a brilliant man. And I consulted with Bill. Quite honestly, if the main reason I supported Kennedy was because Bill Cassidy thought that we should see how it plays out. And one thing I will say throughout this whole process is I'm thoroughly impressed with Mehmet Oz. I believe that he's quite capable and running a very important part in CMS.
You also aroused the president's ire when you made it clear that you were not going to support Ed Martin to be U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C. The president took the note and just made him the pardon attorney at the Justice Department. What have you thought about how he's been there?
I couldn't care less about what he's doing in the Justice Department. What I cared about was having him be the key prosecutor in the district where he excused what happened to these police officers on January the 6th. It was just disqualifying. I mean, he literally was excusing some of the behavior of people who entered the building. I still call those people who got pardoned by the president thugs. There are about 200 or 300 people that should be behind bars now for what they did on January the 6th. I do agree with Martin that there were people that in the heat of the moment, they got more prosecution and more devastating consequences than they probably deserved. But at the end of the day, folks, we got to treat you like an adult or a child. You decide which one you want to be. You walk into a beaten and battered Capitol and you see police officers being wrestled to the ground and you don't think you're in a bad situation, you should probably think twice. So there should have been a consequence for them, maybe over prosecution. But where Martin missed it with me is saying that there was all of them had been over prosecuted, and then all of them had a reasonable basis for their frustration.
What do you
Absolutely
say? What do you say to somebody who says that you seem to let President Trump off the hook for a lot of these things? Because Trump is after all, the one that pardoned all those people that you're talking about. And you're the first Republican I've seen make the connection between the thin blue line, make the connection between back the blue, and what happened January 6th.
Jake,
a lot of Republicans don't want to talk about that.
I went to the Senate. I walked around this building for a week telling every one of these Capitol police officers who are professionals, keeping their emotions clear. I said, what the president did sucked, and I want you to know it. And then I got to thinking, I probably should elevate that by going to the floor and saying the same thing, and I did that. And I think I have a number of members here who disagreed with the pardons who didn't. So this is it's something that I went and feel very strongly about.
Yeah.
I mean, I was here. I was the last member out of the chamber on January 6th. I saw everything unfold, and I'm still angry about it. And I have no tolerance for anyone. The president should know if there is anyone coming up for a nomination through any committee of my jurisdiction that excused January the 6th, that they're not going to get confirmed in my remaining tenure in the U.S. Senate.
I want to ask you about the flooding because obviously Texas is dealing with that today. Last year, flooding from Hurricane Helene caused at least 108 storm-related deaths.
In North Carolina alone, over 250
Yeah,
overall.
but North Carolina alone, in many areas, as you know, are still struggling to recover. This year, the Trump administration has made cuts, wants to get rid of FEMA, has done job freezes when it comes to the National Weather Service, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Association, et cetera. Can states manage these disasters effectively without the help that has traditionally come from the federal government?
Last night, I was talking with two linemen that we recognized for their heroic work, trying to get power reestablished to the Veterans Hospital out in Western North Carolina. And I was also talking with two disaster response coordinators who were a part of that. And I said, can y'all imagine if all of a sudden we've got a storm forming off of Africa coming this way, maybe it's moving over, it's a Category 1, that the southeastern states are going to have to get together and do paper, scissors, rock to see who's going to manage this regional impact. I mean, the last time I checked, storms have a really bad habit of crossing state
Right.
and county jurisdictions.
They don't care whose congressional
so to
district
me,
it is.
anybody that's advising the president we should get rid of FEMA has clearly had no experience with disaster response. We have a lot of experience with disaster response in the Southeast. We've got a number of recommendations to modernize FEMA, to shift more responsibility down, but the federal government has to be the convening authority. I mean, FEMA was actually, its birth was out of a disastrous response in the past. But if we're talking about changing the execution, that's fine. But the federal government has to play a role. There are no major storms that you could possibly have a coordinated, solid response to if it's a pickup game by states.
Right.
And so it's just absurd. Whoever recommended that clearly is out of their depth on disaster response.
President Trump went after you while you guys were fighting about that. He said, Thom Tillis has hurt the great people of North Carolina. Even on the catastrophic flooding, nothing was done to help until I took office. Then a miracle took place. Tillis is a talker and a complainer, not a doer.
Well, President, I get to Western North Carolina and see if his view of the work that I've done there fits with the view of Western North Carolinians. I think that they're pretty happy with how much I leaned into it, even advising the Trump campaign to probably not land in Asheville during the campaign when we were trying to use the airport to evac victims. So I will agree to disagree on that one.
What is the future of the Republican Party? And to a lesser extent, I'm interested in your your take on the Democratic Party, because there are a lot of people out there who think that both parties right now are completely adrift. One of them happens to be in power, so it seems less so because they are in charge. But are you worried about the Republican Party?
I am. I think the good news is the Democratic Party is going so. I'm glad that they're yielding to their instincts because they're bad, and they're going far left. I mean, you've got basically a socialist Democrat. I think that's code for almost communist when you're talking about taking over means of production, running for New York mayor.
Not just running, he's the Democratic nominee. Yeah.
So I think our hope, I think that the Republicans can seize this moment to be the practical party, to be the party that's solidly conservative, while these litmus tests for how liberal you are to get out of a Democratic primary continue. If the Republicans do that, we get what I'm worried about is a leader on the Democratic side saying this stuff is killing us. If they do that and they become the party that's more likely looking like left of center, that becomes a real problem for swing states. But the good news is right now, the inmates are running their asylum, and this gives us an opportunity to really come together.
What does the Republican Party need to do to get its message right? Less fealty to one man?
I have fealty to ideals. I don't have fealty to any one man. And I do believe that we're doing the president a disservice. President Trump, nor any president, could possibly be expected to have a detailed understanding of all the things that they have to deal with. What the president needs to do is start really looking at the outcome of some of these policy decisions and ask himself, is he really getting the best professional advice? That's what I've been trying to provide him for the last few years, and that's what I'm going to continue to provide him. And it's worth what he paid for it. But as somebody who's been in elected office for 20 years at the leadership level in the State House and doing all I can up here, I hope that he starts listening to more of us and fewer of those people who pretend like they're the president when he's out of the room over in the White House.
Who are you talking about?
There will be plenty of time for me to cover that later.
Not later in this interview.
Right.
There was a 2013 profile of you in Charlotte magazine. It talked about your dad. It was a boat draftsman.
Yeah.
And one job brought your family to Louisiana.
New Orleans, West Wego.
And the profile says that's where your work ethic went into overdrive. You started looking for creative ways to earn money. You walked cats in exchange for cash or biscuits.
It's true.
So that's the first chapter.
It was Miss Wright. To me, it's all about income. And I mean, I was 8 years old at that time, and I had walking around money. As a matter of fact, I remember I don't know, some of that money that I raised, I also went to a 7-Eleven and bought an engagement ring for a girlfriend I had when I was 9 years old.
So if that's your first chapter, walking cats for biscuits, what's the next chapter going to be for you after you leave? I know we get another year and a half of you here in D.C., but what's after that?
I think probably I still love technology. I spent my entire career in technology and then enterprise transformation as a partner at PW, at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and IBM. And I love execution. Honestly, I finally got my 4-year degree, but I was admitted to the partnership at Pricewaterhouse a year before I got it. And that was mainly because I'm fairly good at execution. I want to go back and do some of that. I like getting my hands dirty. I'd love to do turnaround work for problem businesses or startups.
In terms of the next year and a half, how are you going to turn around this institution here? How are you going to make it more responsive to the American people?
I'm going to keep on working and trying to make it very clear to the president. I've never done anything that I thought knowingly would undercut him. Everything I've ever done has been to improve the outcome. And so I'm going to work on that. And I am going to hold some of these people accountable who I think are shielding him, do not understand the legislative process, certainly do not understand execution, and they're the biggest risk to his legacy. And if we don't get it right, as I told the president, if we don't get this right, then he's probably going to have 2 of the most miserable years of his life if the Democrats take the gavels in the House. And I'm trying to avoid that.
All right. Senator Thom Tillis, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.